I think this is important to note because it shows that ultimately what Plato is saying about the sophists isn't totally false. I don't know how right it is. I don't know if we can ever learn, but he did have a point. And I think that this is important to note that if we have a society and societies where people think that all that matters is their power and fame, and rhetoric is the way that they use to achieve power and fame, and let's say in wealth and all these bits, and they do not care about the truth or about others, their society will disintegrate.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have people who think like that govern our societies, we are led into the process of disintegration. And Plato has a depiction of this in the Allegory of the Cave. Now, in the Allegory of the Cave, he doesn't talk directly about the sophists, but it's definitely the case that he had the sophists in mind there. So I will read a bit from the text, and we should discuss parts of it and some themes from this allegory. Yes, okay. So, this is Book 7 of the Republic. Next, said I, compare our nature in respect of education and its lack to such an experience as this. Picture men dwelling in a sort of subterranean cavern with a long entrance open to the light on its entire width. Conceive them as having their legs and necks fettered from childhood, so that they remained in the same spot, able to look forward only, and prevented by the fetters from turning their heads. Picture further the light from a fire burning higher up and at a distance behind them, and between the fire and the prisoners and above them, a road along which a low wall has been built, as the exhibitors of puppet shows have partitions before the men themselves, above which they show the puppets. All that I see, he said. See also, then, men carrying past the wall implements of all kinds that rise above the wall, and human images and shapes of animals as well, wrought in stone and wood and every material, some of these bearers presumably speaking and others silent. A strange image you speak of, he said, and strange prisoners. Like to us, I said. For to begin with, tell me, do you think that these men would have seen anything of themselves or of another, except the shadows cast from the fire on the wall of the cave that fronted them? So this is a really rich allegory, and we see a really interesting depiction of the human condition in such societies, because the allegory is an allegory in respect of education, in respect of our beliefs. So what he says is that, in a sense, in society, most people, the majority of people, are sort of are very ignorant, and their ignorance constitutes a sort of fetter, and constitutes a sort of yoke. And there are people, the puppeteers and the puppet masters, who intentionally want to present half-truths to the rest of to the majority of the population in order to keep them captives. Now, they're not kept captives for any other reason other than maintaining puppet masters in power. And he definitely thought that sophistry was a form of puppet master, of being a puppet master. The sophists were also puppet masters. Now, how does this seem?
Seems pretty reasonable to me. One of the things I've always got out of the Plato's cave analogy is that the people in the cave, I've always understood it to mean that they've always lived their life in the cave.
Yes.
And the cave is meant to represent the subjectivity of the human experience, in that they see the shadows on the wall as real entities, as real as themselves, rather than a symptom or a sort of aspect of something more materially true, if you know what I mean. Or the thing that is casting them they can't perceive, and therefore they don't believe it exists. The shadows are the entity in and of themselves, rather than a product of something with greater agency. And I've always understood it to mean that if your perspective is limited, if you're literally in the dark in a cave, then you can't perceive what is out in the light, what is true, and outside casting the shadows, the things that I think are meant to represent the principles that guide our world and the universe.
So Plato is operating within this tradition of rationalism, although not necessarily consciously, but he was portraying reason as a form of light. And that is why we talk about people as being illuminated. And that is why the age of reason is the age of enlightenment.
Well, light light provides us with more information than dark, doesn't it? I mean,
Yes.
when we light something up, we're getting more visual information than when it's dark. So it's a very good analogy to talk about something which otherwise would be quite abstract, because everyone is familiar with light and dark. It's impossible not to encounter it.
And what he implies here is that we have this ability to reason, but we very frequently get wrong what reason is supposed to tell us. And that is why most people in the cave cannot draw a distinction between the light that comes outside the cave and the light that comes from the fire of the puppet masters. So the puppet masters are not using genuine knowledge. They are themselves ignorant, and they are using their techniques in order to keep the people captive. And this is also where I think we have the saying that the truth will set you free, in a sense, that ignorance is a form of unfreedom in itself. And he would say that puppet masters are not interested in knowledge. They don't care about the truth. And they're just interested in keeping the population enslaved or keeping the population under control. Now, slavery is not necessarily slavery that comes in the form of physical change. It could come in the form of brainwashing. And that is the kind of slavery that he has in mind. So what Plato presents us with is a panorama of society and the way that knowledge is used into it. Or let me rephrase it, the way that information is used into it. We have many people who are good at swaying an audience, and we have also people who may pursue the truth and who aren't particularly good or who are not much better than sophists in presenting it. And he says that at some point a particular captive will break the chains and will sort of start ascending the long way upwards. And at some point he says that it's very difficult to see the light, especially when you are habituated in the cave. Mm-hmm. And at some point he says that the more you pursue knowledge, and the whole idea of ascension is the process of philosophy.
So this is more of an epistemological point than anything else.
Yes, but in Plato there is no sharp distinction between epistemology and ethics, as there is now, where we have people, for instance, in universities who get a degree on epistemology and they have zero knowledge of ethics, and they live and operate in these ivory tower settings where they're completely disconnected with the extra academic world, and they very frequently shun people who don't belong to academia.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. So he says that at some point, the person who grasps the truth much more than others and has justice at heart will go back to the cave, and the people there are going to laugh at him. And that very frequently they're going to listen to the sophists. And here is again Plato's pessimism about the human condition, about society, that
I think he's right, though.
yes, ultimately people are going to fall for the sophists. And it's really hard to say that he's wrong.
Yeah, I really don't think he's wrong, to be honest. But
Yes. Which is why, but I think that we have progressed in ways that Plato did not predict, and possibly ways that Plato would be resistant towards. And there has been some progress made. But it is important to remember that sophists are always a present danger to our societies. That is why I think we should focus on section 4 of a discussion on sophisms and sophistry, and become more aware of what sophisms are, give some examples of sophistic arguments, and also talk about other means that sophists may use, because the whole process nowadays has extra means. It's not just people talking with their physical voices for the actual ears of those who are present. We have other means that contemporary sophists can use, such as mass media, or all sorts of media through which propaganda can come out. Now, sophistic arguments have an appearance of validity and soundness, but they are neither sound nor valid. And even more important, in order to pronounce them as sophistical, we need to contextualize them, look at who utters them, and also to exercise judgment. Now, let me say, the validity of an argument is the following feature. An argument is valid if it is the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion is true. There can be valid arguments with false conclusions, and their premises are wrong. But it is this feature that is a sort of internal feature of an argument. And the sound argument is a valid argument with true premises. So sophisms are arguments that are intended to appear as sound, to appear as valid and as true, having true premises and conclusions, but they are not. And it is very important to point out that very frequently we don't have the time to sit down and dissect them. And that is what makes them incredibly dangerous.
Absolutely.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.